It started like any other ordinary night, a home filled with laughter, the smell of dinner lingering in the air, and the comforting chaos of a family sleepover. The Malrick household in Cantonment, Florida, seemed like the picture of serenity on the evening of September 21st, 2001. Sherri Malarik, a dedicated Navy air traffic controller and mother of five, bustled about, making sure everyone was settled. Her life appeared perfect, devoted to her family, respected in her career, and seemingly happy in her marriage. But as darkness fell, an unsettling calm began to creep over the house. By morning, the warmth of this family gathering would be overshadowed by the discovery of a crime so brutal, so inexplicable, that it would shatter their world forever. The peace of dawn was broken by a horrifying scene. A minivan parked near a Winn-Dixie supermarket, its windows streaked with early morning dew. Inside, the lifeless body of Sherri Malarik lay slumped over. Her bright future, her life as a devoted mother and Navy professional, had been extinguished in an act of brutal violence. She had been shot twice in the head at close range. The precision was chilling, almost clinical. Word of the discovery spread quickly through the small Florida town. Questions swirled. Why was Sherri out so late? Who could have wanted her dead? The town, gripped by shock and disbelief, watched as investigators descended upon the scene, their search for answers just beginning. The tranquility of Cantonment was gone, replaced by whispers of betrayal, fear, and murder. In cases like this, investigators often start close to home. The brutal nature of Sherri's death raised a chilling question. Was her killer someone she trusted? All eyes turned to Greg Mallorik, her husband. To the outside world, Greg seemed like the devoted partner, a steady presence in Sherri's life. But those who knew the couple whispered of tension beneath the surface. Investigators began to dig, looking for cracks in the perfect facade of their marriage. Had their seemingly idyllic life masked something sinister? Was Greg the grieving husband he portrayed, or was there a darker, hidden side to him? The detectives weren't ready to jump to conclusions, but one thing was clear: Greg's version of events would need to be carefully scrutinized. Greg Malorik's explanation for Sherri's final hours raised more questions than answers. He claimed that Sherri had decided to leave the house late at night to run errands. She didn't tell him where she was going, he said, and he thought little of it at the time. But something about his story didn't sit right with investigators. Why would a mother hosting a family sleepover, surrounded by her children and loved ones, choose to leave the comfort of her home for a late night errand? Detectives knew this behavior was unusual, especially for someone as family oriented and responsible as Sherri. The more they examined Greg's version of events, the more cracks they began to notice. Was he hiding something, or was this just the beginning of a web of lies waiting to unravel? The investigation took a chilling turn when forensic tests revealed gunshot residue on Greg Malrick's hands and pants. To investigators, this was a damning piece of evidence, proof that Greg had recently fired a weapon. When confronted, Greg remained steadfast in his denial. He insisted he had nothing to do with Sherri's death, claiming there had to be another explanation for the residue. But his calm demeanor only deepened the detective's unease. How could gunshot residue end up on him if he wasn't involved? The discovery seemed to tell a story that Greg refused to admit, and investigators began to wonder, was this a calculated killer trying to cover his tracks? Or could there truly be more to this mystery than met the eye? As investigators combed through the Malarik home, they stumbled upon a discovery that only deepened the mystery: Sherri's purse. Tucked away in a bedroom drawer, it seemed to contradict Greg's account that she had left to run errands. The purse held the mundane contents of everyday life: credit cards, a wallet, and keys, but its location was anything but ordinary. If Sherry had truly gone out that night, why wouldn't she have taken her purse with her? And who had placed it there? The find wasn't just puzzling, it was suspicious. To detectives, it felt like someone was trying to stage a scene or erase evidence. But was it Greg, or could someone else have been involved in this bizarre twist? The purse raised more questions than answers, pulling investigators further into a labyrinth of deceit. As detectives dug deeper into Greg Malarik's life, they uncovered a secret that changed the trajectory of the investigation. Greg had been carrying on an affair with a woman named Jennifer Spone, a detail he had conveniently left out during his interviews. Jennifer wasn't just a passing fling. She was someone Greg had grown close to, and their relationship had reportedly caused tension in his marriage to Sherry. To investigators, this revelation was explosive. Affairs often bring motive into sharp focus, especially in cases of spousal homicide. Could Greg's desire to be with Jennifer have driven him to eliminate his wife? Or was Jennifer herself holding a piece of the puzzle that could unlock the truth? Detectives knew one thing: this affair wasn't just a secret, it could be the key to solving the case. When questioned, Jennifer Spone didn't hold back. She painted a picture of a marriage on the brink, revealing that Greg had confided in her about his growing frustrations with Sherry. According to Jennifer, Greg had expressed a chilling sentiment: he wanted Sherry out of the picture. This revelation sent shockwaves through the investigation. Could Greg's words have been more than just venting? Jennifer claimed she had no idea he might act on such thoughts, but her testimony suggested otherwise. Yet, something about her story raised doubts. Could Jennifer have her own reasons for implicating Greg? Was she being entirely truthful, or was she hiding something about her own involvement? Investigators couldn't ignore the possibility that Jennifer's role in this tragic puzzle might be larger than she let on. Greg Malarik's alibi was simple. He claimed he had been in the garage working on an air compressor when Sherry left the house that night. On the surface, it seemed plausible until witnesses came forward with observations that raised serious doubts. Neighbors and family members noted Greg's unusual behavior in the hours following Sherry's disappearance. He was seen showering and changing clothes shortly after she had supposedly left for errands. To investigators, this wasn't just odd, it was suspicious. Why would Greg feel the need to clean up so thoroughly if nothing had happened? The timeline of events was beginning to crack under scrutiny. Did Greg's behavior that night betray a guilty conscience, or was there another explanation for his actions? The detectives were starting to see a pattern, and each inconsistency brought them closer to unraveling the truth. In the aftermath of Sherry's murder, Greg's behavior raised more than just eyebrows, it deeply unsettled those closest to the family. Sherry's teenage son, Jacob, later testified about the moment Greg broke the devastating news to the children. According to Jacob, Greg gathered the family and told them about Sherry's death with a cold, detached demeanor. There were no tears, no visible signs of grief, just a blunt delivery of the horrifying truth. To a grieving child, it was a moment that felt deeply wrong. Was Greg's lack of emotion a sign of guilt, or was he simply in shock, struggling to process the unthinkable. To investigators, this detail added another layer of suspicion, further muddying the line between a devastated husband and a man with something to hide. The discovery of gunshot residue on Greg Malarik's hands and pants was a crucial lead, one that placed him disturbingly close to the act of firing a weapon. Yet, this seemingly damning evidence wasn't without its complications. The murder weapon A25 caliber handgun remained missing, a void that created a significant challenge for the prosecution. Without the firearm itself, the chain of evidence tying Greg directly to Sherri's murder was incomplete. While gunshot residue can suggest proximity to a fired weapon, it doesn't definitively prove who pulled the trigger. Greg's defense team latched onto this ambiguity, arguing that the residue could have come from innocent transfer, perhaps from handling items in the home that had trace amounts of residue from a different source. Investigators scoured every possible location, focusing on areas Greg could have accessed. Nearby wooded areas, waterways, and the Malrick property itself were searched extensively, but no weapon was found. Each passing day without a discovery only deepened the frustration of law enforcement and Sherri's grieving family. The absence of the weapon also fueled darker speculation. Had the gun been disposed of meticulously, or was it in the hands of someone else? Could another individual have been involved in Sherri's murder, either as an accomplice or the true perpetrator? The forensic evidence, though compelling, was not enough on its own to paint a full picture. For the prosecution, the missing weapon was a glaring hole in their case, leaving them with a troubling question. Without it, could Greg ever be tied conclusively to the scene, or was reasonable doubt already working in his favor? In the days and weeks following Sherri Malarik's murder, Cantonment, a small and tightly knit Florida town, became a community fractured by speculation. The news of Sherri's violent death spread like wildfire, igniting fierce debates over whether Greg Malrick was truly the culprit or an innocent man caught in a web of circumstantial evidence. On one side were those who believed Greg's guilt was undeniable. They pointed to the damning presence of gunshot residue, his suspicious behavior on the night of the murder, and the discovery of Sherri's purse hidden in the family home. To them, Greg fit the profile of a husband who had everything to gain by removing his wife from the picture, especially in light of his affair with Jennifer Spone. Yet, others saw Greg as a man wrongly accused, the victim of a narrative driven by circumstantial evidence and community gossip. They questioned whether investigators were too quick to focus on him as a suspect, possibly overlooking other leads. The lack of the murder weapon and the reliance on testimony from his lover only deepened their skepticism. Local coffee shops, church gatherings, and school parking lots buzzed with theories, each more elaborate than the last. Was Greg guilty of a calculated crime of passion? Or was someone else, perhaps even Jennifer herself, responsible for Sherri's untimely death? The community's fascination with the case grew, and with it came a darker side. Whispered accusations, rumors, and a sense of paranoia that rippled through the town. For the residents of Cantonment, the lines between truth, perception, and justice blurred. As the investigation unfolded, one thing became clear: the divide among neighbors was as sharp as the questions surrounding Sherri's murder. Despite the initial flurry of activity, the investigation into Sherri Malarik's murder began to stall. The gunshot residue, the hidden purse, and Greg's suspicious behavior provided tantalizing leads, but lacked the concrete evidence needed to secure an arrest. The missing murder weapon remained the most glaring absence, a piece of the puzzle that investigators couldn't find no matter how hard they searched. As weeks turned into months and months into years, the case officially went cold. For Sherri's family, it was an agonizing limbo. They had lost not only a beloved mother, sister, and daughter, but also any sense of justice or resolution. Every unanswered question was like a wound that refused to heal. Meanwhile, Greg Mallorik continued with his life, appearing to move on while the shadow of suspicion loomed large over him. To some, his ability to carry on was a sign of his innocence. To others, it was proof of a man who had evaded justice. For the small Florida town of Cantonment, the case became a haunting reminder of how quickly a community can unravel when the truth is out of reach. Sherri's name was whispered in conversations for years, her death a dark mystery that refused to fade. With no arrests and no new evidence, the cold case files sat in storage, gathering dust as Sherri's family clung to hope that one day the truth would finally emerge. For almost 2 decades, Sherri Malrik's murder remained an open wound, a cold case that seemed destined to remain unsolved. But in March of 2020, an unexpected phone call shattered the silence. Jennifer Spone, Greg Malrick's former lover, reached out to investigators with a shocking revelation. Jennifer claimed that Greg had confessed to her years earlier, admitting that he was responsible for Sherri's death. According to her, Greg had described in chilling detail how he had shot Sherri twice, coldly stating that the first shot had not killed her, forcing him to fire again. It was the kind of statement investigators had waited years to hear. Her testimony reignited the investigation and gave law enforcement the push they needed to act. On the strength of her claims, Greg Mallorik was arrested and charged with Sherri's murder, bringing a long dormant case back into the spotlight. But as significant as Jennifer's statements were, they also raised a cascade of questions. Why had she waited so long to come forward? What had motivated her to break her silence after nearly 20 years? And most importantly, could her story be trusted? The arrest was a turning point, a moment of hope for Sherri's family that justice might finally be within reach. Yet, with Jennifer's credibility now under intense scrutiny, the case was far from over. In many ways, the fight for the truth had only just begun. In a packed courtroom, Jennifer Spone's testimony sent ripples of shock through those present. She recounted a chilling moment, claiming that Greg Mallorik had confessed to her, in stark detail, the murder of his wife. According to Jennifer, Greg admitted that he had shot Sherri twice. The first shot was not fatal, forcing him to fire again to ensure her death. Her words painted a harrowing picture of premeditation and cold-blooded intent. But as damning as her testimony seemed, it also raised critical doubts. Why had Jennifer waited so many years to share this information? Had her sudden cooperation been motivated by a desire for justice, or was she acting out of self-interest? The defense seized on this ambiguity, pointing out potential holes in her story. Could Jennifer, once deeply involved with Greg, have fabricated or exaggerated the confession to deflect suspicion from herself? After all, her close relationship with Greg and proximity to the events of that fateful night left her in a precarious position. Jennifer's testimony was the strongest piece of evidence tying Greg to Sherri's murder, but it came with its own cloud of uncertainty. For the jury, her words represented a critical crossroads in the case. Was she a truth teller bravely coming forward, or a woman with her own dark agenda? The answers would determine whether Greg Mallorik would face the consequences of Sherri's death or walk away yet again. In the spring of 2022, Greg Mallorik finally faced a jury for the murder of his wife, Sherri. The trial was the culmination of years of anguish for Sherri's family and the community of Cantonment, Florida. It was a moment that promised answers but delivered more questions. The prosecution built their case around two critical pillars: Jennifer Spone's testimony and the gunshot residue found on Greg's hands and pants the night Sherri was killed. Jennifer's account of Greg's alleged confession was detailed and emotional, and the forensic evidence seemed to place him in close proximity to the firing of a weapon. On the surface, it looked like a compelling case, but the defense knew exactly where to strike. Without the murder weapon, they argued, there was no definitive link between Greg and Sherri's death. They questioned the reliability of Jennifer's testimony, pointing to her delayed report and her past romantic entanglement with Greg as reasons to doubt her credibility. The defense also suggested alternative explanations for the gunshot residue, arguing that it could have been transferred innocently or through unrelated activities. These counterpoints, combined with the lack of a physical murder weapon, left jurors grappling with one crucial element: reasonable doubt. By the end of the trial, the jury was deadlocked. Some believed Greg was guilty, while others felt the evidence fell short of proving it beyond a reasonable doubt. The case ended in a mistrial, leaving Sherri's family devastated and the community divided once more. For Greg, it was a temporary reprieve, but for everyone else, it was another agonizing step away from justice. After weeks of emotional testimony and heated arguments, the jury reached an impasse. They were deadlocked, unable to come to a unanimous decision about Greg Malarik's guilt. The weight of reasonable doubt loomed large, with some jurors convinced by the prosecution's evidence, while others remained unconvinced without the murder weapon or irrefutable proof. The judge declared a mistrial, and the courtroom erupted in a wave of mixed emotions. For Sherri's family, it was a devastating setback. They had waited over 20 years for this moment, only to see justice slip through their fingers yet again. The thought of enduring another trial, reliving the pain, and facing the uncertainty of a new verdict felt almost unbearable. Meanwhile, Greg emerged from the courthouse maintaining his innocence. He showed no signs of relief or celebration, instead portraying himself as a man wrongfully accused. His demeanor, however, did little to sway public opinion. For many in the town, the mistrial wasn't proof of his innocence, it was merely a delay in his reckoning. The mistrial left everyone grappling with the same unanswered questions. Was Greg truly innocent, or had a guilty man just escaped conviction? As the dust settled, the case felt as unresolved as ever, hanging like a dark cloud over the Malarik family and their search for justice. In October of 2023, Greg Malarik found himself back in court. This second trial was Sherri's family's renewed hope for justice, but for Greg, it was another opportunity to prove his innocence. This time, however, the defense came armed with a sharper strategy, one that zeroed in on Jennifer Spone's credibility. Jennifer's testimony had been the cornerstone of the prosecution's case in the first trial, but now it became the focal point of the defense's attack. Greg's lawyers painted her as a woman with her own agenda, someone who had waited nearly 20 years to come forward not out of guilt or justice, but to deflect suspicion away from herself. The defense highlighted inconsistencies in her timeline and her motivations, arguing that her intimate relationship with Greg during the time of Sherri's murder made her an unreliable witness. They suggested that Jennifer might even have had a more direct role in the crime, casting a shadow of doubt over her claims that Greg had confessed to her. Without the murder weapon or new forensic evidence, the prosecution's case struggled to stand against the defense's relentless dismantling of their star witness. As each day in court passed, the prosecution's case seemed to lose its grip on the jury. For Sherri's family, it was agonizing to watch. Jennifer had been their strongest ally, but now her credibility was in tatters. By the trial's conclusion, the momentum had shifted dramatically. The jury was left to deliberate not just Greg's guilt, but whether Jennifer's testimony could even be trusted at all. Once again, the truth seemed maddeningly out of reach. After weeks of emotional testimony and intense courtroom drama, the verdict came down in Greg Malarik's second trial. The jury, swayed by the defense's dismantling of Jennifer Spone's credibility and the lack of physical evidence, acquitted Greg of first-degree murder. For some, it was a moment of vindication, a victory for a man who had always maintained his innocence. For others, it was a gut-wrenching conclusion, a second failure to hold someone accountable for Sherri Malarik's brutal death. The prosecution had relied heavily on circumstantial evidence and a lone witness whose testimony had become riddled with doubts. Without the murder weapon, without new forensic breakthroughs, and with Jennifer's testimony called into question, the jury was left with too much uncertainty to convict. As Greg walked out of the courtroom, a free man for the second time, his face showed no emotion. For years, he had lived under the weight of suspicion, and now he was legally exonerated. But for Sherri's family, the verdict was another devastating blow. They had waited more than 2 decades for justice, only to watch the man they believed was responsible for Sherri's murder leave the courthouse, untouched by the system they trusted to deliver the truth. The acquittal left the town of Cantonment divided once again. Was Greg, a wrongfully accused man, finally cleared of suspicion, or had he managed to escape justice once more? For many, the verdict only deepened the mystery surrounding Sherri's tragic death. For Sherri Malarik's family, the fight for justice is far from over. They have spent more than 20 years demanding answers, enduring mistrials, acquittals, and the unrelenting scrutiny of the public eye. Despite the court's decision, they remain convinced that the truth has yet to fully surface. Their faith in the justice system may have been shaken, but their resolve is unyielding. Greg Malarik, now legally cleared of all charges, continues to live his life under the shadow of suspicion. Though the courts have declared his innocence, the whispers of doubt still linger in Cantonment and beyond. For those who followed the case, the acquittal feels less like a conclusion and more like an unfinished chapter in a story that refuses to end. The question that haunts everyone remains the same. Was Greg truly innocent, or did the justice system fail Sherri Malarik and her family? With no new suspects, no murder weapon, and no concrete answers, the case of Sherri's murder hangs in a painful limbo. Her name remains etched in the memories of her family and the community, a tragic reminder of how elusive justice can be. What do you think? Did the courts get it right, or does a killer still walk free? The answers may still be out there, waiting for someone to uncover them. Share your thoughts in the comments below and join the conversation. Together, maybe we can shed light on what really happened to Sherri Malarik. Thank you for watching Crime Pulse Stories, where every case matters and every story deserves to be told.